Picture this. You're a young noblewoman in 3rd century Rome. Your family has wealth, status, connections to the imperial court. You think you're untouchable. Then one day a messenger arrives at your villa with an imperial summons bearing the seal of Empress Julia Soaemias Bassiana. You assume it's an invitation to some grand feast or cultural event. Instead, you're about to become a participant in the most depraved spectacle the Roman Empire had ever witnessed. Public sexual competitions where noble women were forced to perform for the entertainment of the imperial court. And yes, this actually happened. The historical records are there, documented by contemporary historians who witnessed these events firsthand. What I'm about to tell you will completely shatter everything you thought you knew about Roman decadence. Our primary sources for these events come from Cassius Dio's Roman History, Herodian's History of the Empire, and the controversial but contemporary Historia Augusta. These weren't rumors or gossip. These were official court historians documenting imperial activities for posterity. Archaeological evidence from the Palatine Hill excavations has uncovered spaces that match descriptions of these private amphitheaters, complete with underground chambers and specialized seating arrangements that could only serve one purpose. We're talking about a systematic exploitation that affected hundreds of noble families across the empire, operated for nearly 3 years, and fundamentally altered Roman aristocratic society. The scale was unprecedented. And if you think this story couldn't get any more twisted, smash that subscribe button, because we're just getting started. The rabbit hole of imperial depravity goes deeper than you can possibly imagine. So how did this nightmare actually work? Julia Soaemias, mother of teenage Emperor Elagabalus, didn't just wake up one day and decide to humiliate Rome's elite women. This was a calculated system of control, meticulously planned and bureaucratically organized. First came the summons. These weren't requests. They were imperial commands. The message was always the same. You are cordially invited to participate in the Empress's cultural symposium on feminine virtue and devotion. Picture this. You arrive at the palace thinking you're attending some philosophical discussion. Instead, you're escorted to a private amphitheater where other confused noblewomen are already gathering. Then Julia Soaemias herself appears, flanked by Praetorian guards, and announces the true purpose of the gathering: competitive displays of devotion to imperial pleasure. But here's where it gets systematically horrifying. This wasn't chaos. There were schedules. Written records were kept of participants' performances. Rankings were maintained. Winners received imperial favor and financial rewards. Losers faced social exile, or worse. The competitions themselves. I can't describe them in detail due to YouTube's policies, but imagine the most degrading spectacles you can think of, then multiply that by 10. These women, daughters of senators, wives of generals, were forced to compete in acts that would have been shocking even in Rome's notorious brothels. But wait, it gets worse. Because Julia Soaemias wasn't content with private humiliation, she began inviting foreign dignitaries, rival court officials, and eventually started charging admission to wealthy Romans who wanted to witness the spectacle. One specific case that historians recorded involved Claudia Severa, wife of a prominent senator. When she initially refused to participate, Julia had her husband's political appointments revoked and their family's grain imports blocked. Faced with financial ruin, Claudia was forced to comply. But Julia's control mechanisms went beyond economic pressure. She began using the events to gather blackmail material. Secret observers recorded which noblewomen participated willingly, which resisted, and what each one was willing to do to protect their family's status. The Empress literally created a comprehensive database of Roman aristocratic women's sexual activities and moral compromises. This information became currency in imperial politics. By 2020 CE, Julia Soaemias had exported this system to other major Roman cities. Alexandria, Antioch, and Carthage all established their own cultural symposiums under local imperial representatives. The normalization process was gradual but deliberate. First, participation was presented as patriotic duty. Then it became a requirement for maintaining court access. Finally, it was simply expected behavior for any woman seeking to advance her family's political position. An entire generation of Roman aristocratic women grew up knowing that their social status depended on their willingness to participate in these degrading competitions. Mothers had to prepare their daughters for what awaited them at court. The psychological impact was devastating. Contemporary writers like Dio noted a marked increase in suicides among noble families, mysterious illnesses affecting court women, and a general atmosphere of fear that permeated Roman high society. So how did Julia Soaemias maintain this system of institutionalized sexual exploitation? The answer lies in understanding just how perfectly she leveraged existing Roman power structures. First, enforcement. The Praetorian Guard wasn't just protecting the emperor, they were actively monitoring noble families for compliance. Refusal to participate wasn't just social suicide, it was literally treason against the imperial family. Second, the carrot and stick economics were brilliant. Families who participated received tax breaks, preferential trade agreements, and priority consideration for government positions. Those who didn't faced economic warfare. But what about opposition? Surely some powerful Romans tried to stop this madness. They did, and Julia had specific methods for dealing with them. Senator Marcus Aurelius Severus attempted to organize a formal complaint to the emperor. He disappeared during a routine trip to his country estate. His body was never found, but his political allies got the message. For those she couldn't eliminate, Julia deployed her collected blackmail material. Remember those detailed records of everyone's participation? She used them to ensure absolute loyalty from compromised families. The system became self-perpetuating. Victims became enforcers, using their knowledge of others' shame to maintain their own precarious positions within the imperial court. But Julia Soaemias made one fatal miscalculation. She assumed her son Emperor Elagabalus would always support her activities, but even he began to realize that his mother's system was destroying the empire's social fabric. The breaking point came in 222 CE, when Julia decided to expand the competitions to include foreign noblewomen from allied kingdoms. This wasn't just internal Roman politics anymore, it was international humiliation. King Artaxerxes of Armenia withdrew his daughter from a planned marriage alliance after learning what would be expected of her at court. Similar rejections came from Parthia, Germania, and other allied regions. Rome's military alliances began crumbling as allied leaders refused to risk their women's honor for political agreements. The empire was literally falling apart because of sexual politics. The end came swiftly and violently. In March 2020 CE, a faction of Praetorian guards, senators, and even some of Julia's former victims coordinated a palace coup. Both Julia Soaemias and Emperor Elagabalus were assassinated in a single day. Looking at this historical nightmare, it's impossible not to see patterns that still exist today. The systematic sexual exploitation of women by those in power, the use of shame and blackmail to maintain political control, the normalization of abuse through bureaucratic processes, the psychological mechanisms Julia Soaemias employed, isolation, economic pressure, social ostracism, the creation of competing victim hierarchies. These are still the tools used by predators in positions of power today. We need to remember the hundreds of Roman noblewomen whose names we don't even know, who suffered in silence, who took their own lives rather than comply, who were forgotten by history while their abuser was recorded as an empress. So I want to ask you, what other historical abuses of power do you think have been sanitized or ignored by traditional histories? What patterns do you recognize from this story in modern contexts? Drop your thoughts in the comments, but let's keep this discussion respectful to the victims we've discussed today. This has been another deep dive into the darkest corners of history here on the Hollow Throne. If you found this investigation valuable, that subscribe button and notification bell help us continue exposing the stories traditional historians won't tell. Until next time, remember, power corrupts, but absolute power creates monsters.